In this module, Module C, we're going to look at how eyewitness testimony reflects our accurate memory. In other words, do we really remember the things that we've seen in a very succinct, accurate way? I would encourage you to watch the video that I posted on eyewitness memory just to have a better understanding of what we're talking about here. But basically, eyewitness testimonies are what they rely on in court all the time. So for instance, somebody witnesses a crime and they are scheduled to appear at court 6 months later, sometimes even longer than that, and they have to recall as much as they can in as much detail as they can about the perpetrator. There's a lot of problems with this, which we'll see in a few seconds. We'll see why this isn't always an accurate reflection of a person's memory. We're going to look at other factors that affect how well we remember things, other than trauma and abuse and so forth, such as our mood, the context that we are in at the time of the memory, and so forth. So let's begin by looking at eyewitness testimony. Some people say, oh yeah, I know what I saw. I was walking down the street, and on the other side of the road, about a half a mile away, there was a fellow who just cut right in front of this other woman and cut her off. I saw it. I saw the whole thing. I saw the whole accident. He was going really fast, and he was at fault. Are you right, or are you wrong? Now you might say to yourself, well, I saw it, so yeah, I trust what I see. But sometimes we can be swayed by information that we receive. If we receive leading questions, for instance, and you might see this in courtroom drama type shows all the time, where they'll ask questions like, well, wasn't the guy driving really fast? Wasn't he drunk? Didn't he appear to be drunk and be sort of veering all over the road? You know, those kinds of questions lead a person to answer in a certain way. So the lawyer is working to defend his or her client, and they may use those questions as a way to get you to change it subtly or become a less credible witness. What are some of the other factors that may affect how well we recall a traumatic event? Well, let's look at that in a little bit more detail. First of all, at the encoding stage. What do we mean by the encoding stage? This is the time when you're actually experiencing the situation. And you might be very stressed. Let's say you witnessed a mugging and the person had a gun or a knife, and you just want to get away from that as quickly as possible so that you don't become involved in the incident, that you don't become another victim of the incident. And so you might be feeling all this stress and worry, which is natural because of the violence and disturbing nature of that particular incidents, and you might start transferring things unconsciously. So unconsciously thinking that this is what I saw, this is what I witnessed, and you transfer that memory to your storage capacity. And then if we take this a little bit further and think about the courtroom sort of issue again, it often is a long time from the time you've stored that information to the time you actually have to retrieve it and remember what it meant. And you may misremember. And sometimes it might be small details, like he was wearing a blue sweater when actually he was wearing a black sweater, or it may be your expectations about the situation, your expectations that you wanted to get away from this particular situation really quickly, and you didn't spend time to really look at who was there and what was happening and how it was happening and so forth. So you may not be able to give as much detail as if you felt safe or a safe enough distance. I'll give an example. I witnessed a violent crime many, many years ago when I was sitting in a restaurant with my brother. We were sitting enjoying our dinner, and these two guys were out on the road outside of the restaurant. And, you know, we weren't paying really attention to what was going on because we were chatting and enjoying our meal, as I said. But at one point it got really loud. And so that loudness was enough to make us sort of stir and watch. But we were safe because we were inside the building. They were on the other side of the road, and there was a lot of people in the restaurant. So we were able to somewhat accurately recall the people involved in the situation. Although years later now, I can't recall if there was 5, 4, 3, or how many people that were involved there. And even in the time that it took us to have to make a testimony about it, because the police came and took statements, there was some discrepancy between what my brother saw and what I saw. And so they went and took the statement of another person who was able to see what was going on and probably had a better view than from the vantage point where my brother and I were sitting. So the point here is that we had the expectations that we were safe, and so we weren't making as many mistakes as somebody who may have been in a situation where they did feel that they could be part of the violent situation that's unfolding in front of them. So can we minimize them? Well, that's one of the issues that as I said before, that I would encourage you to watch the video, because it talks about using a sequential lineup rather than a solid lineup where we have everybody at the same time. And there is somewhat better accuracy, but it's not necessarily completely accurate. It really depends on how well we know the situation. And another factor, of course, is the person of a different race than you are. You may say that shouldn't matter, I'm not a racist, and so forth. And maybe you aren't, but sometimes people are more likely to notice the differences in people of other races than they are to notice the similarities to themselves. So these are factors which can affect how accurate that eyewitness testimony really is and what we can do about it. One controversy surrounding the discussion of memory is this notion of repressed memories. Some psychologists have noted that people who have come to psychologists or therapists, psychiatrists with traumatic background, traumatic childhood issues may claim to have had been sexually assaulted by a family member or by a guardian or someone who may have been babysitting them. And that's not to say that these aren't true, because in some cases they are most definitely true. And even psychologists who are discounting this repressed memory phenomena will admit that there are many people who have suffered childhood abuse, and because of the painfulness of it, they suppressed or repressed that memory. But one of the things that's found is that, from the skeptical psychologist, is that these patients who claim to recover these memories are actually recovering false memories at the suggestion of therapists that were created by. And what happens is, according to Elizabeth Loftus, who was one of the critics of this particular theory, the therapist convinces the patient that with no memories that abuse is likely, and the patient obligingly uses those strategies to reconstruct a plausible or believable situation that would support the conviction that this therapist has helped transpose in them. But other therapists would disagree with Loftus, in particular Connie Christensen. She argues that it's not a question about whether repressed memory occurs, but how often. So sometimes it's happening in individuals that may not realize, or may even realize, that something strange happened to them. They may be feeling the ill effects of trauma later in life, but now are sort of coming to terms with the fact that it was probably because of an event that maybe helped them to come to this traumatic stage. So those repressed memories then, in other words, might even actually be dissociative. In other words, because the trauma was so severe, they developed almost another persona to experience that rather than they themselves. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about mental health disorders a little bit later in the semester. But just for now, there is a possibility of this transference of your personality onto a second personality, and it's why sometimes multiple personalities develop. Okay. Let's look at a couple of different types of memories that happen to us that we are able to deal with. And not everybody has the second one, but I'll talk about that in a second. The flashbulb memory is a memory of an intense, vivid situation. For instance, 9/11, 2001 was a vivid one for many people. Maybe not for all of you, but maybe for people who are in their late 20s, early 30s. It's a very vivid memory because you can sort of place where you were when you heard about the information and what happened. Now, is this because we have all those wonderful pictures that kept being shown over and over again by CNN, or is it just because of the traumatic nature or the event itself? We call these extremely vivid memories flashbulb memories. They're formed when you have an event, you learn of an event that is highly shocking and highly emotional. So maybe another one closer to home and more recent is the shooting of the Canadian soldier. It was actually a Canadian soldier from Hamilton who was guarding the National War Memorial, and a person shot and killed him, then entered into the Parliament buildings and engaged in a gunfight. And this was a very vivid memory. People may say that they can remember all the details of what happened and how it happened and the sequence of events and the car he was driving and so forth. We call this a flashbulb memory. Now, the second type of memory that I want to talk about, the eidetic memory or eidetic imagery, is when you can see something for a very short period of time and then remember it again in detail. Excuse me, some people call this photographic memory, which is why I have the picture of the camera lens. The photographic memory or eidetic imagery is when we are really able to remember things in detail. If you look on page 168 or figure 6.6 in your textbooks, you'll see an image of a test that has been done for eidetic imagery. And what they do is they ask children to look at the picture and then try and draw the picture themselves. And those with eidetic imagery usually maintain that they see a face, they describe it in detail, and they actually can describe the second sketch in figure C. This can only be retained if you actually are able to fuse the images together rather quickly through eidetic imagery, through eidetic recall. The next effect that I want to talk about related to how well we remember things is where were they in the list? When we are given a list of words, let's say we're given a list of 10 words, and we have to recall as many as we can of those words, we're more likely to remember the first ones and the last ones. Why is that? The reason we are more likely to remember the first ones is because of the primacy effect. It's the first thing we saw, it's the first thing that went into our memory. We had more time to rehearse it. When it comes to remembering the last, or the second to last, sorry, this is known as the recency effect. And the reason why we can remember these kinds of things is because they are the closest. They are the ones that were put in most recently into our memory banks. So if I were to give you a list of, say, 10 words, like I said before, and then gave you, take a couple minutes between, talk about something else, come back to it, you would be able to either recall most of the first words or most of the last words. But the middle words might be a little bit more challenging, depending on how you organize and understand the information, whether you have rehearsed that primacy stuff, the stuff that you heard at the beginning, or you have that recency effect hasn't faded away yet. Excuse me. The other things that will affect how well you remember things is your emotional state at the time and the environment that you're in. So I want to talk about two things. When we talk about context-dependent memory, we're talking about the environment itself. Have you ever had a situation happen? And I'm sure you have. And most people say yes when we talk about it in a classroom setting, where you are in the family room and it's on a different level than the kitchen. You decide you want to get yourself a glass of milk, or you want to get something to eat, or somebody asks you to get them a beer, or whatever the case may be. And you get to that kitchen and you think, what was I supposed to get here? I can't remember. I'm not sure. And then you go back downstairs and say, oh yes, that's what I was supposed to get. Before the person can ask you if you got their beer, water, juice, whatever the beverage of choice may be. This context-dependent memory works because some of the context or the environment that we're in is coded when we're coding the information. So we remember a little bit about where it is, and it's easier to recall when we're in that same environment. When we're taken and placed into a different environment, it changes the atmosphere. And this is also true. Sometimes people will say, you know, I really knew this stuff well, but here I am at final exam and I can't recall. Because maybe they've recalled the information with the context they learned it in the first place. That is, in their original classroom, and they're writing the exam in a different room. we have to find a way to make sure we know more than just the environment, because obviously we need to recall the information that we learned in that environment. The second one has to do with our mood. When I say state dependent, it means your state of mind, your frame of mind. So I have this picture of a woman talking on the telephone. It's an old-fashioned telephone that probably some of you may not even have seen in your lifetime, or maybe only seen at your grandmother's house. Anyways, the phone, the woman talking on the phone is happy and she's doing some gardening, probably picked some flowers. I'm imagining this scenario, okay? She picked these flowers from her garden and she's putting it together. She gets into the house, she's happy. It's the weekend and she's getting good news. So she's going to remember that because she's in a good mood. But if on the other hand, she was in a bad mood because she had everything go wrong that day and somebody called her with some news that say that's not bad, not good, sort of neutral news, she may perceive it as more bad news because of her emotional state of being sad or upset or angry or whatever the case may be. So sometimes our memories are really dependent on our state of mind when we hear the information in the first place, so that when we go to recall it, we also have that similar sort of reaction, if you will. Okay, this is the end of Module C, and we will be talking about some of the factors related to why we forget, how we can improve our memory, and some of the biological processes that take place in helping us to remember and gather information.